Hello, today I'm going to be talking about some really cool things you can see with nighttime satellite imagery of the Earth. So if you want to follow along, just head on over to academo.org/demos/nighttime satellite imagery. I'll put the link in the description if you need it. So here we are. The first thing that I noticed that if you zoom in a little bit, it becomes really easy to spot major cities across the world. So we've got Madrid here, Paris, Moscow, St. Petersburg, and these are things that you just wouldn't really notice if you were looking at a normal daytime satellite view. You would have a rough idea, but there's absolutely no real indication of where these cities are. And basically, this comes about because the bright lights generally correspond to the world's urban areas. Now, if we scoot across the pond to the United States, you'll notice that with New York, it's a bit more difficult to actually figure out what's going on here. And this is an example of urban sprawl, where New York City is surrounded by very urban areas in the northeastern United States. So just coming back to Europe again, you'll notice that a lot of people end up living in coastal areas. As you can see here, very bright lines around the coast. And thinking about why this might be, I think probably the number one reason would be because the coast provides great opportunities for trade with ports and whatnot, and also with fishing. There's always going to be a plentiful supply of food by the coast. And speaking of fishing, if you actually zoom in a bit further, you can begin to see little specks in the ocean. Now, you might think they were islands, but if you go back onto the satellite view, you'll see that it's just empty space. And believe it or not, the satellite used to collect this data is sensitive enough to pick up fishing boats, which is quite incredible, really. Now, it's not only population density that this is good for. If you look at Africa. Africa is a continent of 1 billion people, and yet there isn't that much light coming off it. Compared to Europe, for example, which has around 750 million, so fewer people than Africa, yet you do have a lot of light coming off. And it turns out that there's quite a strong correlation, really, between an area's GDP and the amount of light it generates. So here you can see Europe is very bright and it has a higher GDP than Africa, so it fits in with that trend. Okay, so what other cool stuff can you see with the map? Well, if you remember a few minutes ago, I mentioned about how you could see the boats in the sea down here. Well, if you come up to the North Sea, again, you can see points of light where, if you check the map, there is no land. This time, however, instead of boats, this is actually a series of oil rigs, offshore oil rigs, and this just gives you an idea of the scale of the operation that's taking place out there. So now zooming out and heading down under to Australia, again, you'll see a series of lights in the centre where, if you check the satellite, there are no built-up areas. So how can you explain this one? Well, it turns out these are actually bushfires, and they actually look slightly worse than they really were. And this is due to the way the image was formed. So basically, to make sure that the satellite could photograph the Earth without any cloud cover, it had to make several passes of the same area, and obviously during the time elapsed between each pass, the fire would have moved on slightly and then have been recorded again in the next pass. So this is it shows essentially how the fire developed over time. I think my favourite example of night light is if we go over to Hawaii, which is located here, and zoom in, you can see here what you may think would be a coastal town, but if you go onto the satellite view, you'll see it's actually a steaming volcano, and this is just a lava field heading straight into the sea. And going back to the night view, you can see how the satellite has picked that up, and that's just really, really interesting. So I hope you've enjoyed this quick overview of some things you can see. There are loads of other things. Have a good look around and let me know if you find anything spectacular in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you later.